You're listening to the Family Podcast from PursueGOD.org.
Well, hey, parents and couples, I'm excited to be back for another podcast today. We're going to focus on a parenting topic, and we're going to talk about an issue that is a growing epidemic in our society today, and it's kids and anxiety. Now, most of us, probably even from our own experiences as teenagers, struggled with anxiety, perhaps depression, but we're seeing it more and more in our kiddos. And the reason for that, there's a lot of reasons. A few of them are just the influences of social media. I think there's just more pressure on our kids, whether it comes to academics and the schools that we send them to, sports and different clubs that we put them in, that there's just this more of an adult responsibility and commitment level that even our kids in early to middle elementary school are faced with. And part of the problem then is because their brains haven't fully developed and they haven't learned some of these coping mechanisms that we learn as we go into our teens and adulthood. Our kids are left with not knowing how to manage the emotions that they might be feeling on the inside. Now, the definition we use for anxiety is the intense, excessive, and persistent worry that happens from just our everyday situations. Now, obviously, there's a continuum, and there's, low levels of anxiety and then high levels of anxiety where someone would be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and may even be on medication. But for what we're talking about today to you parents is how you can help your kids identify their emotions and feelings of anxiety, the signs that you should be looking for. And then really the bulk of our time today is going to be spent on how do we help our kids manage anxiety at whatever level. And for most of us, the level is within the quote unquote normal range, where it doesn't completely disrupt their life and they're curled up in a ball in their bedroom, but yet you're seeing some things in your kids and moments where they struggle and angst that they're carrying around. And as parents, I know for me, when my kids have battled anxiety, because both of my kids have, it creates a lot of angst in us as the parents. And we want to make sure that we're giving our kids every chance to succeed. And so when we see them struggle, we might start to panic. So the first thing that I want to say today, even though I want to raise the alarm in terms of this is a growing problem in our society, that more than 1 in 10 kids are dealing with anxiety now, that there's some key things that we can do as parents, especially as Christian parents, to help our kids learn how to cope when those emotions come. Okay, so here's some signs that maybe you've noticed in your kids, or maybe you need to start looking out for to know if your kiddos are currently struggling with anxiety. So it might be things like trouble concentrating. So maybe the teacher, this can even be in preschool, guys. This is getting younger and younger, but if you notice that your kid has a hard time concentrating, whether it's a task at school or a project you're having them do at home, and they just have this fidgety way about them. They're just not able to concentrate. And that might just be a sign that there's this internal unsettledness in them that they don't know what it is or to even know how to put it to words. So it comes out as a lack of concentration. For other kids, it might be nightmares. Dreams is the way that our brains process our thoughts and experiences. And so for sometimes your kids might manifest their anxiety in nightmares of thoughts they've had or something they saw on TV. And so in their sleep, their brain is processing that. Or maybe there's a big event about to happen. Maybe you're moving away. And so maybe your kids are showing their anxiety through nightmares. It could just be a low level of irritability, that they're just on edge. They're frustrated easily. Again, it's because there's this background emotion of unsettledness that just makes them not have the patience or the ability to be present and patient in just the normal day-to-day stuff. Of course, there's also things that come out in negative thoughts of our kids, that if they look at the worst case scenario, that they're always worrying about, what if this happens or what if this happens? And again, that might be your kid's way of processing internal fears that they have. Maybe it's something they heard from a classmate, something they heard on TV. And so their brain is they're stuck in this negative loop of thought and fear. And then also just physical tension, just being restless. These are just some of the signs that our kids might be showing that on the surface of it, you might be irritated with your kids. Like, what is your problem? You need to sit down and finish your spelling homework. But for them, it might be something deeper. It might be that they've got something going on. And if we're talking about kids that are in, the 4-year-old range through early to mid elementary school, they don't really have the words to even describe what might be happening. So it's just manifesting itself in these things. So my first thing to you parents is just pay attention to the behavioral things that you see in your kids. And instead of just focusing on the surface of it, lack of concentration, irritable, being negative, or just being fearful about everything, to recognize there might be something underneath the surface that you're going to need to help your kids explore and understand. And then, of course, get them to a place of getting better coping skills to know how to manage that as they move along. Now, there's lots of reason why our kids get anxiety. And I know as a parent, you want to feel like you create a home life and a home environment that's safe and peaceful, and our kids can just grow and, just be amazing and have no problems whatsoever. But the reality is there's lots of things in our culture and in the outside world that we can't control as parents. And these are some of the reasons why kids get anxious. It's the fear of failure, of not measuring up. And more, that's becoming the issue. Maybe still more with our junior high school age where social media is more of a thing. But listen, what the stats are showing is that kids are getting phones now when they're in second grade. So they're seeing social media, they're seeing body image things, they're seeing what other kids are doing and feeling like, man, my life doesn't look like that. My body doesn't look like that. So there's this fear of failure that our kids are facing. There's the social piece that's been true since the beginning of time of wanting to feel like you fit in and belong. And again, our kids are feeling that more and more at an intense level of, do I have friends? Do people like me? Am I a likable person? Am I funny? I'm not as funny as so-and-so. I'm not as cute as so-and-so. So those are things that are kind of going on internally for our kids. In the younger age, we see a pretty common way that anxiety comes from is the stranger danger piece of feeling like, whether it's a sleepover at someone's house that you don't really know the parents. And so your kids might just freak out, if they're 3 and 4 years old and you're going into church and they're clinging to your leg, it's, there's some stranger danger there that could trigger some anxiety that's triggering, maybe some of those internal thoughts that they're having of maybe they've heard something, maybe they saw something on the news that you're not even aware of that has created a trigger of stranger danger and that somebody wants to hurt them. And then sadly, we also just have to be aware if there's some past trauma. For some families out there, especially if you have, you're a divorce situation, you can't control what your kids are exposed to when they're in your ex house, or, maybe when your kids go spend time at somebody else's house, a friend's house, a neighbor's house, there are things that they could be exposed to, things that could happen to them that you weren't aware of at the time. And it may take a long time for kids to put that experience, that trauma, to words. So that's something else that we just need to be aware of, sadly, in this broken world in which we live, that trauma happens. And sometimes it could even just be a small trauma where, you left the grocery store and you're pushing the cart and thinking about the groceries, and your kid was kind of distracted by something. And all of a sudden they look around and you're gone and they don't know where you went and you don't know where they are. And so that, it could even be a trauma that doesn't last very long, but those are things that can kind of stick in the brain of your kiddo that they might come back to and might form some anxiety around. So we've talked about some signs that can manifest themselves in our kids, and we've talked about some of the triggers of reasons why our kids are feeling anxiety and more and more. But to me today, I just feel like as a parent, and I know for you guys listening, okay, well, fine, anxiety is a thing. I see some of these signs in my kids. What do I do about it? And that's what I want to spend the rest of our time really thinking about today, especially as Christian parents. How do we manage it? Because I know for me as a parent, as soon as I saw anything in my kids that looked like they were sad or maybe felt left out at the party or something, like my immediate reaction as a parent is to be like, how do I fix that? I don't want my kid to feel that. And the problem with that is our kids watch what our reaction is to these situations. So if we react with a strong reaction and we look anxious, then for sure our kids then are going to be like, oh, well, so see, when I wasn't invited to that party, that felt like a big deal to me. And now I'm just seeing how my parents responded to it. So see, it is a big deal. See, maybe I'm not that cool. Maybe I'm not accepted by my friends. So it's really important for us as the parents that we come with a strategy so we're not being reactionary when we see these signs of anxiety in our kids, and then our reaction makes it worse. So the first message I want to give to parents is we need to normalize the feeling. I mean, for me with my kids, I talk to my kids. I have so many memories, and really some memories that have come back to me later in life that I didn't really realize at the time. But I think to normalize the feelings of anxiety that you've had as a parent. I remember as a kid, I watched the news. It was on in the background. My mom was making dinner and I was like playing on the floor or something. I don't remember exactly what I was doing, but I heard a news story about a girl that had been kidnapped. Now in the moment, that kind of went into my brain, and how I managed that fear was to become afraid to sleep over at anyone's house. So for months, I would be invited to a sleepover. I might go for a while, but then I would always call my parents to come home, like at 11 p.m., midnight sometimes. And finally, through some conversation with my parents, they were able to identify, like, where did this fear come from? Well, it came from a news story that they didn't even know I heard. So those are some examples that I just kind of would share with my kids. Like, I remember as a kid feeling this way. I remember when I tried out for that new team and wondering, am I good enough to be here? And the fear of rejection, and, how like my heart would race, and would share stories of how I felt left out at times in junior high. So I think the first thing we want to do as parents is to not freak out and go from my kids showing a sign of anxiety, that means they need to be on medication. It's just like anxiety is a normal emotion that we feel over everyday situations, like we talked about in the definition. The question is, how pervasive is it? That's what we want to watch for in our kids. If it's impacting their ability to function in the day-to-day stuff, then that might be, which we'll talk about at the end, where you might want to get a professional counselor involved. But for most kids, they're feeling these feelings of anxiety. So the first thing as parents we need to do is normalize it. Talk about it. Well, how does that feel when you showed up at your new school for the first time? That butterfly feeling, that's anxiety, that you were nervous. Everybody gets nervous when they're getting put into a new situation that they're unsure of. The next thing that we want to do is just encourage open communication. So anytime your kids, like, this is so good to start from a young age too, to have like family time, do family devotionals, talk together about how your day was. How are you feeling? If they say, Billy stole my toy in preschool, talk about, well, how did that make you feel? And why did that hurt your feelings? And why is that not a nice way to be? And what would be the better way to be? And how should you treat people? Like, talk to your kids, create open communication from a young age, because as they get a little bit older, the tendency, especially when they get in their teenage years, is to want to shut down and to just internalize all of it and not process it. And that's, as parents, we want to create an environment where our kids can share with us whatever they need to share. And that, as I said in step one of normalizing the feeling, that our reaction to our kids' words and feelings and emotions is that we don't overreact to those and then make our kids feel like, A, something is wrong with me, or B, I can't tell my parents this because they just totally freaked out when I shared it. Let me just give an example of this. Our daughter, I've shared this before in other topics, but our daughter is more of an internalizer. It took her a long time to realize that putting her feelings to words and expressing them and sharing them, that was actually the healthy, right thing to do. It helped her in the end. It took us a while to convince her of that. So I would notice her like just going down to her room or being quiet at dinner and just kind of being quiet and closed down. And so, the first few times I would just go sit on her bed, like, what's going on? How are you? And it would just make her shut down more. I could just tell that wasn't really her comfort level. So what I decided to do is I just need to create some space for her to have opportunity to share, but to do it in a way that doesn't feel so intense. So I just started, she had an interest in cooking at the time. This is early junior high. So I would just have her come upstairs. We'd find a recipe and we'd make it together. And as we're cooking and cutting vegetables and doing all that, then I would ask some of those questions like, well, how was your day? How's it going with that so-and-so friend that you've mentioned has been mean to you at different times? And then with that distraction of doing something else together, she would lower her walls and then she would start to share. So that might be true for your kids. Creating open communication might not be like sit down and we're going to talk about it right now and force your timeline on your kids. It might be let's go do something, an activity that your kid enjoys, and then start asking questions. For our son, he was big into basketball. So I would just go out there as he would shoot and I would rebound for him. And as we were doing that, I would ask him questions and he would open up more. But my main goal for my job as their mom was I wanted them to feel like they could share whatever they needed to share with me, and that I created a space that made it comfortable for them. Now, it's not to say that I always did that well or that there weren't some things they shared that internally I was a little panicked over, but I wanted to show them that it's safe, that it's normal to feel anxiety and tell me about it. And the more you can put it to words and express it, the less power it has over you internally, because that's what happens when we feel anxiety over something. Maybe it's a thought, maybe it's a past trauma that keeps coming up. For your kids to realize, like, for you to be able to bring that into the light, this is a biblical concept, to bring that into the light frees you, rather than what the enemy wants is for us to stay in the dark and to hide it and keep a secret. And all that does is create more anxiety upon more anxiety. And so we want to train our kids like, it's okay, it's good to share these feelings and why you're feeling that so that other people and their experiences can help you manage through it. Okay, so now here's the third thing. We want to face fears gradually, especially if like maybe you have a kiddo that just going to school is just really hard for them. Just they don't like it. And every time you're doing the school drop off, they're crying and upset and don't want to go. As parents, I think we can be tempted to be like, okay, I'm just not going to do that anymore. I've seen that so many times, like going into kids' church, for example, that kids are just like crying and they don't want to go in. And so as parents, like for our own sanity's sake, our inclination might be to say, forget it. It's not worth it. I'll just bring him into the big service with me, or we'll just homeschool or something. But the reality is like a part of our job as parents is to train our kids to learn how to manage the anxiety, because anxiety is going to come along in every phase of their life. So if we're protecting them from that emotion or that experience that creates anxiety and we just remove the experience, then we're not giving our kids the chance to develop the coping skills and to gain confidence. Like going to kids' church is actually fun. And the more I do it, the more comfortable I get, the more fun I have, I'm learning. And I'm so glad I don't have to go sit in boring big church, right? So as parents, we need to kind of keep the process moving in the direction of, we're not going to just say, yep, you don't have to do that anymore. You cried, you didn't want to go, you were afraid, then fine. We just won't make you do that. Because I promise you that'll just keep repeating itself and it'll make your life harder and harder. So the idea would be like, if you've got an anxious kid about going, I'm just going to use Sunday school. Then on Saturdays, like you're talking about, you know what? Tomorrow is church. What do we do at church? We get up, we'll have breakfast, we'll drive in the car as a family, we'll come into the lobby, maybe you get a hot chocolate or something, and then we're going to check into kids' church. And mommy is just, look, this is where the auditorium is. I'm just right here is where I'll be, and I'll be right back to get you as soon as church is over. Talking about it, praying about it the night before, kind of prepping your kids to gradually get that idea into every week. Go in there. Now, obviously, if your kid's screaming and crying and ruining the experience of every other kid, then there certainly might be some gradual change to that. And you might consider it a win that they stayed for 5 minutes and then 10 minutes. For some of you, maybe sitting in the class for a while might be helpful to your kiddo too. But the idea is that you kind of face those fears, you prep them, you kind of gradually work your way to it. You don't just say, okay, my kid showed anxiety over that, so now I'm just not going to make him do that anymore. That's not going to be the right answer, because again, you're robbing your kiddos of the opportunity to start to develop those coping skills, but also robbing them of the opportunities of gaining confidence and realizing that independence from mom and dad is a good thing. Okay, so then the last thing I want to talk about is just how do we teach some coping techniques that when our kids are put into these situations that create anxiety, how do we help them? So for some kids, it might be like, listen, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to picture like whatever their safe place is. Maybe it's their bedroom. They love their room. Maybe it's a mountain. Maybe it's the ocean that you just say, okay, if you ever start to feel like that, the butterflies in your tummy or heaviness in your chest, I want you to close your eyes and picture that safe place. And I want you to take some deep breaths. Another thing to do is if your kids are, if doing a calming activity like putting on music. So again, maybe it's your kid on the way to church or on the way to school or on the way to a sports team that they just every week struggle to want to go to the practice, like turn on some worship music and pray together and just kind of get them ready, get them in the mindset of, okay, so why are we feeling nervous? What are you nervous about today? Okay, you're afraid of doing like that basketball drill because you don't want to mess up. Okay, but you know what? Everybody messes up. So what do we do when we mess up? We just pick up the ball, we go to the back of the line, and we try the next time. Let's turn on some worship music and remember that Jesus is always with us. These are just some practical tools that you can bring to your kids for kind of getting a breath and learning like this feeling is there. So how can I manage it? It doesn't mean I cry and avoid the experience. How can I manage through it? So some peaceful visualization, some worship music, praying together. And honestly, for my kids, one of the best things we did was Bible memorization. So parents, I would find, I'm just going to highlight 2 here today, but go to the Bible and look up things about fear and bravery and faith and, Bible characters that stepped into hard situations and memorize some Bible verses and just say to your kids like, hey, listen, when you're feeling nervous about walking into that new classroom, I want you to say this verse over and over again, because what the Bible says is God's word is living and active. And so it will speak in a moment to a situation for our kids and for them to start to experience that peace that comes over them when they start thinking about Jesus and God's words in his Bible, then that's such a great skill for them to learn moving forward in their life. So just the 2 that I would use, that I use with my kids, was 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. Oh, that's so good. That God does not give us a spirit of fear or that we need to be timid. That no, we can have power through the Holy Spirit and self-discipline, which means we don't have to cry and throw ourselves on the ground when we're scared. That God gives us a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. Oh, that'll be so good for your kids. Philippians 4:6-7. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he's done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. I mean, for my kids, just highlighting that. Like God tells us not to worry. We don't need to be worried or anxious about like the worst case scenario, if we make the team or if our friends accept us. Let's pray about it. Let's bring it to the Lord and he'll give us what we need. And let's, be reminded of ways that God's answered our prayers in the past and thank him for that. And thank him for the friends that we made at school or at church or just other ways that God has shown up in your kids' lives. And then when we trust in him, then we'll have his peace. And at the end of the day, that's what our kids need to learn. That's what all of us need to learn. Let's be honest. That's not just our kids. That's us as adults too. Because as a parent, I have had a lot of anxiety and I have had to learn, like when I get anxious, when I try to take control, it makes it worse. My kids sense it. I've maybe forced decisions on them that they didn't even want. And what I've had to learn to do is to say, God, I'm anxious about this. I'm worried about this situation, but I'm going to trust you. I'm going to live by Philippians 4:6-7, where I'm going to bring it to you. I'm going to thank you for all the things you've done and trust that you will work in this situation. And then I have his peace, which is wonderful. So we want to train our kids from a young age to go to God, to pray, to Bible memorization. And then the last piece just is for those kids that maybe have a deeper level, more of a persistent anxiety, might be good to talk to your pediatrician. And they may say, like, it might be good to go talk to a professional that can kind of help your kids figure out what the hook is of where that anxiety is coming from. So I don't want to leave that out, that for some kids, professional intervention will be super helpful to them. But for a lot of our kids, it's just learning that anxiety is a thing. and we need to learn how to manage it. So when you think about your kids, I just want to encourage us as parents that we want to normalize the feeling, because everybody gets anxious for all sorts of reasons. We want to create open communication where our kids feel like they can learn how to put words and feelings, attaching those and processing through that. We want to face those fears gradually. We want to do like exposure therapy where it's like, your kids are getting ready for school. You're talking about it a month in advance. Like, what will it be like? Now it's 2 weeks out. Now we're praying about it. And now we're like 3 days out. Now we're going to go over to the school and we're going to walk around. We're going to see exactly where your class is, and kind of gradually prepare your kids. And if they've had a reaction and they've had a fear experience with something like going to church, that you don't just stop going to church or stop putting them in class. You just keep working through it. Like, this is why are you feeling anxious? What are you afraid of? What's your fear about that? Okay, so then how can we mitigate that? Let me show you where mom and dad are. We're in the building. We're just a few steps away. And just kind of keep working with your kids on managing that anxiety, that fear response they have, but keep putting them in the situation where they can learn and grow. And then, of course, the last thing is just these coping mechanisms of prayer, visualizing a safe place for them, and Bible memorization. That was the biggest key for my kids. And so parents, I pray for you that you will have wisdom, because all of our kids, they're unique and different in different situations, but the principles are the same, that our kids are going to face anxious things. They're going to have anxious thoughts. They're going to have tough situations. And our job is to create the environment for them to not be afraid of anxiety or their feelings, be able to put it to words and to be able to process through it and have the coping mechanisms so they can continue to grow and to really experience God's peace in their life as they move forward. So prayers for you guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to give to help support our ministry, please visit PursueGOD.org/donate. Find more resources to talk about these topics with your small group, family, or mentor on PursueGOD.org.